But when our interests and values are at stake, we have a responsibility to act. That's what's happened in Libya over the course of these last 6 weeks.
Now, President Obama, over a week now, it's taken for him to speak out on Libya. So it just so happens his Secretary of Defense actually beat him to the punch yesterday. Just one thing. Secretary Gates was singing a different tune from the one we heard from the president just moments ago. Let's take a look.
Do you think Libya posed an actual or imminent threat to the United States?
No. No, it was not. It was not a vital national interest to the United States, but it was an interest.
All right, but wait a minute. Didn't the president just tell the American people that this was, in fact, in our national interest? And here to help clear up all of this is the author of the brand new book, The Fight of Our Lives, Knowing the Enemy, Speaking the Truth, and Choosing to Win the War Against Radical Islam. The one and only, our good friend Bill Bennett is back. Bill, good to see you. Thank you for being with us. Well, can you make sense of this? Because this is what we've experienced, one contradiction from one administration official, and the president even contradicting himself, culminating in a very well-written speech tonight that seems to clarify nothing.
Yeah, well-written, well-delivered, but not well thought out. Notice a couple of things. First of all, if I'm Gaddafi, I'm sitting comfortably tonight. The Americans are not coming after me, unless the president wasn't telling the truth, and we've got some guys in there. You know, Alexander Hamilton said when the U.S. goes, when the country goes, it should go like Hercules. He told Gaddafi tonight he was safe. We want a regime change, but you're safe. Second, we will stop at removing Gaddafi because the coalition will splinter. So who's in charge? The coalition is in charge. Do you remember, this was a speech that really retroactively justified the war in Iraq. That's what he did tonight. Humanitarian grounds, there's no weapons of mass destruction. So he's taking the exact same rationale of George Bush. Do you remember some of us thought stopping on the way to Baghdad was a mistake?
Absolutely.
Took us 12 years. Now, we understand the rebels were stopped today. I don't know if that's temporary or if it's long term, but we could be seeing this for a long time.
But here's the interesting part. He made his humanitarian in nature.
Yeah.
You know, that we had a moral obligation as the United States of America. We can't let this happen. It raises the specter, the question of whether or not we'll do this elsewhere around the world. Putting that aside, didn't George Bush go to the United Nations? Weren't there how many resolutions before George Bush decided to act? Didn't George Bush talk about the humanitarian toll and the death and the brutality of Saddam Hussein?
And
then what's the difference here?
Yeah, well, that's exactly right. And Gaddafi is nothing, by the way, compared to Saddam Hussein. If you're going to make a humanitarian case, Saddam Hussein gassed his own people. He killed hundreds of thousands. Gaddafi probably just thousands. So the moral case is the moral case. The difference is Bush was willing to pursue this case in the war in Iraq. Now Obama says, well, we're going to leave. We're going to leave it up to other people. What happens now? Who's in charge? What is the mission? I think it's a mess. I think it's incoherent.
What does it mean?
If I'm not only if I'm Gaddafi, if I'm Syria, what am I thinking at this point? So to me, the whole thing didn't make sense. I think he was pushed into this because Sarkozy had embarrassed him into it.
Yeah, I think he was pushed into it, too. I think this goes against naturally who he is. What does it mean when an American president says, A, our role is going to be limited, B, he telegraphs no ground troops, and C, he, in a week, transfers power and authority to somebody else?
Well, it suggests it's a very tentative set of proposals. Again, these guys should fear us. And if we go in and we mean business, then we should take them out. And nothing short of that. If you're not going to take them out, forget it.
So what does it mean when he says Gaddafi must go? And then he's not saying it now.
Well, Gaddafi must go of his own volition. But what the heck does that mean? Or Gaddafi must go because the French and the Belgians will ask him to go.
Yeah.
But, I mean, there's no force behind this. What language do we think Gaddafi understands? That's the problem with this thing. And, you know, the other thing you mentioned about George Bush did go to Congress. And let's remember that. And George Bush's coalition was a whole lot bigger than Barack Obama's.
I don't have a problem with him using military action.
That's right.
Without congressional approval. I'm not a believer in the War Powers Act in that sense. But even with the War Powers Act, he has 60 days to act.
Right.
And then another 30 days if Congress authorizes their pullout. So I think he's within his legal rights.
It's a good idea to do it, but it's a particularly good idea to do it, Sean. If you were on record, as the video you've been showing all day and all week, said George Bush was absolutely wrong to do this unilaterally, when in fact it wasn't unilateral at all. Mm-hmm. If you have said Congress should get the right of approval here, then you ought to act on that.
But he sounded like Bush, except there wasn't really the imminent threat, and it wasn't a post-9/11 environment that, you know, that some nations may turn a blind eye. I refuse to wait. Yeah. And I'm thinking, all right, those are the exact arguments we had. What do you think the motivation here is? Do you think it was forced in,
embarrassed into it?
Embarrassed
into it by other world leaders.
And
by
get out as
Sarkozy
quick
and
as I
others.
can.
Yeah, because, you know, it's, you know, I have a listener on my show who says he's an outside shooter. He doesn't like to be under the boards. He doesn't like to use the elbows, doesn't like to mix it up. So he's done this tentatively, now get out. But boy, you cannot use American power like that. Yeah. You cannot just do and make some feints and do some things, send the Tomahawk missiles and leave the work to somebody else. Supposing Gaddafi holds on and starts to slaughter people. Does the rationale change? Again, what is the mission?
Your book, The Fight of Our Lives, Knowing the Enemy, Speaking the Truth, and to win. He doesn't talk about winning or victory, which leaves the option of losing on the table. Do you think he really understands fundamentally, you know, who the enemy is, like who the 9/11 Commission report identified as our enemy that was at war with us? Do you think he gets it?
I'm not sure if they don't know it or if they just will not say it. Part of the book we talk about
this
that.
is a kinetic military action. What's a kinetic military action?
Worse was the Pentagon report about what happened at Fort Hood. Worse was Eric, because they denied it had anything to do with radical Islam. Worse was Eric Holder appearing before the Congress when Lamar Smith said, we have all these bombs, we have all this yelling of Allahu Akbar, does this have anything to do with radical Islam? He's not sure. Now, the American people say, this is something we are worried about, something we need to do something about. And they are accused, when they say that, of being bigots. They're not bigots, they're worried. They're taking people who say this seriously, as we all need to. This book is about the fight in the culture to get this war right.
All right, well, you know, I appreciate it. It's a great book. And, you know, one day we've got to get the Bennett brothers.
To take on the
Beckel brothers are coming up next.
Yeah.
So it'll be you and Graham versus Bob and Bob.
Uncle Bob and
Bob.
We'll do it.
Bob and Bob.
You got a big stage? You're going to need a big you're going to need a big arena. Okay, buddy.
I think you're right. All right.
Thank
Bill Bennett, so good to see you.
Thank you.
And as we've been saying, coming up next, they may be brothers, but they don't agree on much. Left-winger Bob Beckel and his conservative brother Graham, who, by the way, is in the new movie that's coming out, Atlas Shrugged. And they'll be here in studio. Heated debate when we come back, and much more straight ahead.
I said that America's role would be limited, and that we would not put ground troops into Libya, that we would focus our unique capabilities on the front end of the operation, and that we would transfer responsibility to our allies and partners. Tonight, we are fulfilling that pledge.
Now, that was President Barack Obama speaking at the National Defense University in Washington, D.C. just a short time ago. Joining me now with more reaction to that long overdue address, our former speechwriter for Condoleezza Rice, Elise Jordan, and former Democratic congressional candidate Crystal Ball. You know, if I'm Muammar Gaddafi hearing our role is going to be limited, no ground troops, we'll only be there on the front end, and I'm going to transfer power and get the heck out of here, I'm doing backflips. I'm just saying, all right, good. I hole out. I hide out in this location. He leaves, and then I'm ready to go.
Well, except from all reports, that's not what he's doing. There have been multiple reports that he's actually reaching out and people around him.
But that's what he just said. That's what Obama just said. America's role is limited, no ground troops, only on the front end, transfer responsibility. That's what he said.
Yeah, that's right. And do you think the American people really have the appetite for a third full-scale war in a Muslim country?
I don't see the point in going in on this, like, go big or go home. And with this, like, I was not in favor of this intervention at all. I think that it is really ill-founded, and I think that going to war in a third Muslim country when we're now neglecting Afghanistan and Iraq, which still are higher priorities.
That we actually have in common. I also was very skeptical of this intervention. And my frame is, look, if we're going to go in, we have to make sure we don't own this conflict the way that we do own Afghanistan and Iraq, because we do need to focus our efforts
who is going to own
on
this?
those
if
other.
America doesn't own this, who's going to own it? When NATO obviously doesn't have the capability, they need to be utilizing what they have in Afghanistan.
Look at what's actually happening. Look at what's actually happening on the ground. It's been very successful.
Go big, go home, but I want to add one word to that, and win. If we're going to go in, and he says publicly, the President of the United States told the world multiple times, Gaddafi must go. So if Gaddafi doesn't go, how does America look in the eyes of the world? I would say we look like we failed and that we lost.
No, because he's been very clear about saying we want Gaddafi to go. What, we want him to stay?
No,
of course we don't want him to stay. But he's also been very clear.
$100 million a day. We're already nearing.
Also very clear about saying.
Crystal, wait a minute. Wait a minute.
Military
His words
goal
were.
is
Hang on a
not
second. His words were.
Change.
He must go. And he said, he didn't say we'd like him to go, we hope he goes, we pray he goes. He must go.
But he's also been very clear from the beginning that the goal of the military action, now they're taking other actions as well. Diplomatic, they've frozen the assets, they're putting pressure on him in other ways. So we'll just have a stalemate
for a year?
No, but what do you want?
12 years
you
of
either don't
Saddam
want them
Hussein
in, or you want another Iraq or Afghanistan.
One at a time, Elise.
How does Libya become another Iraq or Afghanistan when it is not either of those places? There was a legitimate threat in Iraq. In Afghanistan, it's, where 9/11 came from. Libya, where, he claimed tonight, he said basically the road to Tripoli is through, Tunis and Cairo. Yeah. And I mean, you've got 85 million people. Oh, Tunisia. Yeah. You've got 85 million people in Egypt. You've got, I think, 6 million in Libya.
I have a question. Let me bring up this question.
Okay.
Because he said this for humanitarian efforts. He sounded like George Bush.
Yeah, he did.
Late at the case.
He did. I'll give you that.
All right. So if it's humanitarian, where do we go next? Because you know what? A lot of what's happening in Libya and has been happening there is happening all over the world.
Yeah.
So why here and not there?
And honestly, I do think that is the big challenge. And I think, I thought this was a good speech, not a great speech. And partly there's a lot of uncertainty because there naturally has to be. I mean, there are a lot of questions. We don't know exactly how things are going to go.
Elise.
I don't like to go into an uncertain war when we don't have a sense of our goal. And it's just tonight.
How can you know what's going to happen?
Indecisive ambiguity. Well, at least you know what the desired end state is. Here we're just saying, we don't want to let the rebels necessarily fail. We'll do enough, but we aren't going to we aren't going to go in hard and do anything that's actually decisive, which was the entire speech. It's just been indecisive ambiguity. That should be the
Republican. But the Republican attacks have been so hypocritical. I mean, before we went in, it was, we have to have a no-fly zone, we've got to go in. And now that we're in, everyone's outraged.
Crystal, you're missing the point. Three or four weeks ago, when the rebels surrounded Tripoli, if we would have acted without bowing at the UN, it would have toppled Gaddafi like that because he was on the verge of being toppled. We waited, we dithered, just like he dithered in Egypt and changed his position, just like he dithered with the Iranian movement in 2009. He seems timid. Almost cowardly and indecisive.
Two things. Number one, his administration has been relatively honest about the fact that Libya isn't our #1 priority in terms of national interest.
Why are we there?
Because it's important. Because it's important that we back up our allies, and we prevented literally hundreds of thousands of civilian deaths by going in at that moment.
If he says Gaddafi's got to go, should winning and accomplishing that matter?
Yes.
All right.
Yes,
all right.
and he's taking action.
According to Secretary Yates, it's not a vital national interest, so I'm confused why we're there.
Good point. And unless he is committed to winning, we have no reason to be there. Got to run. You guys have been great. And coming up next, yes, the Beckel brothers, head-to-head, a debate you don't want to miss because Bob's brother is a conservative. And our great, great, great American pal, straight ahead.